Hello friends, welcome back to it 1D10T Does Stuff, and I'm the 1D10T in charge, Trevor Stewart 1308. Thank you for joining me. Today we're going to be reading more from Fearing the Black Body, The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia by Sabrina Strings. Quick mention up front, this stream is... we tend to cover some difficult topics in this stream. We will be talking about racism, sexism, fat phobia, etc., etc. So, you know, if that ain't for you, I get it. Before we get any deeper in, today's ad read. Today's pre-rolls brought to you by The Hidden Leaf, downtown Charlottesville, Virginia. 105 West Main Street on the downtown mall, above the bricks, Suite 200. A great place to go with some great buds, to get some great buds. A bud, and the only thing better than their bud is their customer service. Also, they have the lowest prices in town, according to my own personally highly biased research. By which I mean I was incredibly high when I did my personally biased research. Note of disclaimer, I will be expressing opinions throughout this show, both social and political. Those opinions belong to me. Some of them may belong to other people, as they may say them in chat, but none of the opinions expressed herein belong to our advertisers, The Hidden Leaf. Also, I forgot our other two advertisers, Kush Gang Snacks, purveyors of fine edibles and drinkables, findable on Instagram at KGSnacks434, as well as Firehouse, spelled with a Z. Also findable on Instagram at Firehouse, spelled with Z. Also, Hidden Leaf is findable on Instagram at The Hidden Leaf. Man, I'm just back from, a week-long break streaming, so I'm a little rusty on all of it still. Getting back into it. So, yeah. Well, welcome in, everybody. And as I was saying, we will be reading from Fearing the Black Body, The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia today, and discussing it. And, we will be also, we will, no. Let me try that again. See, this is what I need an editor for the YouTube videos, so that I can edit out these mistakes. Or so that they can edit out these mistakes for the YouTube videos. Let me say a quick something about Tuesday streams. We are in general talking about racism and sexism inherent in the medical institutions and infrastructures in the United States, with an eye towards, more specifically, the danger that black women face specifically in the mental and behavioral health institutions in the United States. We have not dug very deep into the health care of it all, or the mental and behavioral side of the healthcare of it all yet. But we have been digging into some of the other parts of it. And as some people may notice, especially if they're watching this playlist on YouTube in order, I've already read this book, Fearing the Black Body, and have done a terrible book report on it, which is where I began to realize that I'm not quite built for video essays. I'm more built for I'm more built for streaming. I'm more built for live learning. Yeah. So the thing is I keep referring back to this book about some core principles, about some basic ideas, and I felt the need to share those basic ideas with the class. And maybe when we get done with this book, as a bonus, we will go back and watch my book report on it from before and laugh at me a lot, because I'm not good at that. So yeah, that's where we are. Something I said last stream, and I'm gonna say again this stream, is, for some people, I think it's very understandable to want to not engage with this content. People whose lived experience is such that this is not new information to them in any way, I feel like have every right to be like, nah, I don't wanna. However, I do feel like there are people who should not turn away. There are people who should engage deeply with this kind of content and this information, and those are white men. I specifically think that white men need to be engaging more with the truth that marginalized peoples face systemic dangers in our infrastructural system. See what I mean about watching me learn live? You're watching me learn how to put these thoughts together. Well, all right. I guess that's sort of the introduction as to where we are. Get yourself your thinking caps and stuff. Just me, Crystal, great to see you. Thank you for being here. Much love, much love. Let's get your shout out here. All right, thank you for being here. Yeah, so always just me, Crystal. Let us dive in. Let's see where we were last time, and we were, yeah. We were not that far along. Here is where we were. Like, I do not remember talking about Gainsborough. Alright. Hold on just a moment. Let me move my boots out of the way so I can slide in there. It's cold enough here that I'm not actually wearing my boots today yet. I'm wearing big fluffy socks instead, and will put my boots on at a later date, or at a later time, because, well, so, I know no one out there in Viewerland really cares, but my boots don't breathe. They are not in any way, shape, or form natural materials, so yes, comfy. So they make my feet sweat, and then the sweat almost immediately freezes. And so about the time I put my boots on, well, about 5 minutes after I put my boots on, my toes get cold and stay cold. And it's not fun. It's a trade-off between, cold toes or back pain. And I have chosen cold toes instead of back pain. That's, your hands do that? Your hands get really cold really easily? Yeah. My hands are pretty good. My knees get... Gloves don't really help. Yeah. My thought is that would be a circulation issue. That you're just not getting blood to your hands so well. But yeah, that's not fun. I don't like living with cold hands, like with my hands being cold. I don't like my hands being cold. I don't like my shoulders being cold, and I don't like my thighs and knees being cold. Pretty much everything else is okay. Mostly. Oh gosh. Also, you guys don't really want to know this, but I stubbed my pinky toe this morning. And it doesn't feel broken, but it's really bruised. And whenever it touches something just the wrong way, it hurts. Before you reach to shake hands, you lead with cold hands but warm heart. Aww. That's sweet. Yeah, it was... It might... Hands not high? Yeah. Well, alright. Enough putting this off. So we just finished this section. We're in, I believe it's chapter 2. Hi. Yeah, we are in chapter 2. Plump women and thin fine men. We have been discussing the evolution of beauty standards, specifically in Europe. Let me turn this down just a little bit. There we go. We are going to back up a paragraph and get a running start. I think next time we are going to adjust this, because this is not quite working for us. While these developments may seem tangential, actually we're going to back up 2 paragraphs, because this is important. VOC is the Dutch East India Trading Company, by the way, just so we're back on that. If the VOC made slavery only one of the tools in its trading arsenal, the Dutch West India Company, WIC, made the traffic in human commodities its main directive. Founded only a few years after the VOC, the WIC had as one of its primary objectives what has been euphemistically described as establishing direct relations with indigenous people in Africa, in African coastal regions. While the VOC operated largely on the Indian Ocean, the States General granted the WIC a trade monopoly on the Atlantic between Africa and the Americas. Between the 1630s and the 1650s, the WIC became the dominant force in the African slave trade. While these developments may seem tangential to the question of aesthetics, they were, in fact, integral to the issue. As Simon Gikandi has noted, the slave trade was fundamental to the development of the burgeoning culture of taste. Within this culture, the objectification of black bodies in labor through the slave trade turned black people themselves into the shadow figures of modernity, appearing to exist outside of and in opposition to it. Black people thus increasingly came to represent différance, or a perverse primitivity and backwardness, a polemical otherness. Black people became, in other words, aesthetic counterpoints within the budding culture of taste. This had a visible impact on the representations of black women, given the centrality of appearance to the assessment of a woman's worth. Once accorded a measure of dignity and desirability, black women were progressively represented as small, low, and foul. White women dominated the landscape of statuesque beauties. What I get from that is that the process, through the process of slavery, The process of slavery required an othering of black bodies, and most specifically black women, and that othering didn't start in art, but it was very prevalently expressed in the art and the aesthetics of the time. And the aesthetics, the shape of the aesthetics for the future. And that it was a necessity of the it was a necessity of the practice of slavery to depict black women as they say, as less than. Yeah. England had been a relative latecomer to the traffic in Africans in both art and commerce. The country had not participated in the slave trade during its entire first century, but in the late 16th century, England was transformed from underdog to dominant global power. As a nation, England appeared to have skipped the honeymoon phase of infatuation with African slaves witnessed elsewhere on the continent during the early years of the slave trade. The first slaves had appeared in England in 1555, that same year demanding representations of Africans. That same year, damning representations of Africans cropped up. In one book from 1555, the authors described Africans as animals who would fall upon their women. Moreover, Africans were described as utterly free from care because they are always sure to have plenty of food. I don't think that highlighter is gonna do me much more good. The stereotype that black people were sexually and orally indulgent quickly gained traction. Actually, by the early 17th century, the perception that Africans freely gratified their animal appetites was expressed by some of the most elite members of English high society. The celebrated statesman and author Francis Bacon issued a two-part condemnation of African appearance and character that incorporated these two stereotypes. Among others, in it, Bacon parroted the view, also popular in the Low Countries, that Ethiopians, as he called them, were little, foul, and ugly. He added to this now familiar English view that black people were libidinous, writing that they embodied the very spirit of fornication. Yeah. It's some pretty wow. And I think it's important to know that this is stuff that, Francis Bacon said. When you hear about a lot of these English and European... Oh, here, let me, oops, forgot to do that. When we hear about these European and English thinkers, these people of their time who were explorers and thinkers, and they held some pretty problematic ideas around personhood. And I think it's important that we remember that these people were of questionable morals. Perhaps it will come as no surprise then that in 17th century England, as in the Low Countries, as blackness was linked to unattractiveness, so was whiteness increasingly linked to beauty. Yeah. Turn of the century England, known as the Golden Age of English art, philosophy, and culture, was distinct in the tenacity of these color-based associations. For starters, while whiteness had long been associated with purity, goodness, and beauty in the country, the reign of the Virgin Queen, praised for her glowing alabaster skin, codified the association for the citizenry. Poets produced song and verse in homage to their Christian ruler, such as the following: her hand as white as whale's bone, her fingertip with cassadine, her bosom sleek as Paris plaster, held up to bowls of alabaster. That feels dirty. Huh. If the queen's skin was indeed white as whale's bone, it wasn't attributable so much to God as to the milk-colored lead paint she was known to be fond of applying to her face and arms. Nevertheless, the whiteness of her skin, even if owing to cosmetics, elicited positive feelings among her countrymen. The praise surrounding her eventually reached cult status. Historians have shown that her whiteness was a focus for her subjects' sentiments. There was a second reason that the fetish for whiteness reached a fever pitch in 17th century England. Artistic representations had been severely restricted in that country as a result of the Protestant Reformation a century earlier. As a result, images that did not appear accurately reproduce biblical lore, including those featuring black people, were forbidden and in some instances destroyed. The pigeonholing of visual imagery effectively stunted the growth of British painting until the restoration of Charles II in 1660. I have a question about that. Written here on this card. What happened in 1660? What did Chucky the Second do in 1660? Did he pass proclamations, or was it just that the Stuarts were on the throne again and it was okay to be Catholic, which meant it was okay to represent black people in more honest roles? Also, was Chucky the Second the one who abolished slavery in England? Was that in 1660? No. So, yeah, I have questions there. I don't know what those answers are, though. Be an interesting one to research at some point, but again, I'm not good at this. The pigeonholing of visual imagery effectively stunted the growth of British painting until the restoration of Charles II in 1660. I already read that. For this reason, representations of black people by domestic painters were nearly non-existent for the country's first century of involvement in the slave trade. When they did make appearances prior to 1660, it was less in the visual arts than in official court records, poetry, literature, and court masks. The first black woman in the court record, for example, arrived as maids in the retinue of Catherine of Aragon in 1501. Catherine appeared on official business and arranged marriage to the English Prince Arthur. Very little information survives about her courtage, but we do know her black female servants were ridiculed by Sir Thomas More, key counselor to Elizabeth's father, King Henry VIII, as hunchbacked, undersized, and barefoot pygmies of Ethiopia. Wow. Sir Thomas More's evaluation of black women as small and deformed was a prelude to linking of black femininity and the grotesque in Elizabethan art and literature. William Shakespeare often featured tortured black characters in his plays. In Othello, the title character despaired over being treated as a lascivious Moor. Less frequently, however, have scholars commented on Shakespeare's dismissal of black femininity. As appears in his famed Midsummer Night's Dream, in the play, Hermia is spurned by her suitor Lysander, who rejects her in favor of the fair Helena. In the aftermath, Helena and Lysander attack Hermia. Lysander demands that she take her leave, yelling, "Away with you, Ethiop," and "Out, tawny Tartar, out." While Hermia still refuses to leave, the trio have the following exchange. Helena: "Oh, when she's angry, she is keen and shrewd. She was a vixen when she went to school, and though she be but little, she is fierce." Hermia: "Little again? Nothing but low and little. Why will you suffer her to flout me thus? Let me come to her." Lysander: "Get you gone, you dwarf, you minimus, you hindering not grass made, you bead, you acorn." Yeesh. There's a lot of ways to... In a neat jumble, Shakespeare makes Hermia at once a vixen capable since a young age of luring men with her sexual charms, as well as a grotesque and low dwarf. For her sexual and physical transgressions, she is discarded. Helena, Lysander's newly chosen lover, is by contrast depicted as tall, white, and slim, like a painted maypole. English ladies weren't only painting themselves white to enhance their beauty. They were also painting themselves black to reveal through contrast the alleged hideousness of black women. Interesting. In 1605, shortly after the death of Elizabeth, an infamous court mask known as the Mask of Blackness was presented by Jacob I's Queen Anne of Denmark and her court. The Mask of Blackness by Ben Jonson presented the tale of King N-word and his 12 daughters. While the king tries to convince... I mean, I know it's not the N-word. Sometimes I think academics expect too much from people 400 years ago. Possibly. Possibly, but lump me in there too. I mean, you know, I feel like part of what we're getting from this book is the... Oh, hi, Maddie, by the way. I'm sorry. Let me say hi. And give you your shout out. You know, part of what we're going through in this book, what we're learning, what we learned in the first part, is that these opinions of black women weren't always such, that they were being cultivated. And that these ideas were being cultivated to to justify the slave trade. Now, I mean, around the stuff around, light and dark and thinking in that. Yeah, I mean, modern people still fall into that, that trap. It was exploited by the slave trade. And, I don't, looking back and laying culpability at the feet of dead people is, I mean, it's not like they're gonna change. Not like I can change Sir Thomas More or Francis Bacon's mind. And I think William Shakespeare, was more sympathetic than he ever appears, while still being a product of his time. Yeah. Also, there's a little bit of grace for Shakespeare in that I'm well aware that he did not have worldly experience and had to draw on other people's experiences. So, his depictions could be just a little off. Yeah. His 12 daughters. While the king tries to convince his daughters that they are beautiful, they despise their black skin. An oracle, Aethiop, tells the girls that if they wish to remove their blackness, they should go to the land with the name ending in Tanya, that is Britannia, also known as Albion the Fair. The 12 daughters were played by Queen Anne and her ladies in blackface. Their faces and their arms up to the elbows were painted in blackface, or in black, leading the English art collector Sir Carlton, who once sat for a portrait by Rubens, to cringe, complaining, "The lean-cheeked Moors they invented to be a loathsome sight indeed." Yeesh. Neither Sir Carlton nor the 12 painted black ladies were to find any relief until Ben Jonson finished the sequel, which was performed in 1608. At that time, they arrive at the throne of the beauty in Britannia, where they bask in the sun's less scorching glow while chanting, "Yield night, then to the light, as blackness hath to beauty." Oh. Such was the double signification of fairness in 16th and 17th century English literature. After the Restoration, black women were seldom represented in painting, and when they did appear, they were not miraculously rechristened in England as the beauties they had been in other places at other times. Being commonly repainted as pages and sexual conveniences for men from the rising world powers, they remained in the popular imagination as little, base, and licentious. The rise of the slave trade also had a direct impact on changing ideas about the good qualities associated with being fat among the English people. Perishable goods reaped from slave labor began arriving from the colonies that would forever change the English way of life, one which would go on to have curious impact on the English diet and body size: sugar. Sugar production had been developing at breakneck speed in the late 16th century Brazil, then a colony of Portugal. In the 1620s, the Dutch Republic attempted a hostile takeover of the northernmost Brazilian territories. The war that ensued was fought in a series of skirmishes in which the Dutch captured a key port in 1630. Only to lose it again in 1655. In the meantime, sugar production in Brazil dropped precipitously, a shift that allowed the British and their colony of Barbados to step into the void. The mind-boggling profits the English reaped from the sugar plantations were one obvious benefit of this trade. Another was the widespread availability of a commodity once deemed so rare and enticing that it was dubbed white gold. In 1660, England imported 1,200 barrels of sugar from Barbados and other key West Indian holdings. By 1700, that amount had jumped to 50,000 barrels. When it came to the sheer volume of sugar sent to the mother country, the British were rivaled only by the Dutch. As sugar imports soared, prices plummeted, making what was formerly a luxury item readily available to the average citizen of England and Holland. Tea houses and coffee houses sprang up on fashionable London thoroughfares. Sugar was creating whole new industries and centers of European social life and culture, along with delicious new opportunities for daily delight. But with the improved standard of living came the dissipations of a high life. Let me try that sentence again. Hey, JB, what's up? Man, I mean, I get that. I'm, oops, jeez, there we go. I actually do my coffee without sugar. No cream, no sugar. But I get it. Cheers. Coffee is life. Coffee, which was another transformational good from... You've been using less sugar these days. Good. It ain't great for us. It's okay to have some, but man, it can do some damage. But yeah, coffee is another one of those things from that area, from that same area that was transformational in the development of the world. However, I don't think coffee had as much of a connection to the slave trade. I know it has some connection to the slave trade, but I'm not sure if it has as much connection as sugar does. I think partially because of because of who owned which colonies. But I'm not sure. Now I'm curious about that. What I think we're getting to in this, what the author is, what Sabrina Strings is getting to, is that as sugar became more prevalent and the lower classes were allowed to have sugar and food in general, they started putting on weight. They started getting larger, and all of a sudden it became less of a distinction. Being big was something that only rich people could do. They were the only ones who could afford enough food really to be fat. And certainly afford enough sugar. But as that changed due to the transatlantic slave trade and colonialism, that became that product became a lot more readily available, and general sizes went up. Wow. I almost made it to the end of that thought without getting lost, and then I completely got lost. Alright. But with the improved standard of living came the dissipations of the high life. While malnutrition remained the prevailing concern for most of the population, a mounting number of the moderately well-off were growing fat. Let me... Doctors in England eyed the swelling number of fat people with consternation. In 1620, for example, the Oxford-trained English physician Tobias Werner lamented the rising rates of corpulence among the English, using for the first time the word obesus to describe excess fat. Werner argued that obesity had adverse health consequences. He offered a treatment to make slender such bodies that are too gross. Now, the other thing that is going on here, other than the class war aspect of this, is that we have to remember that they had been linking lack of self-control and indulging in excesses to being black, to the African people. Well, I guess not just African people, but to black people. This will enable them to then start comparing white people who don't control their appetites with the perceived negativity of black people. And I mean, yeah, I'm cheating. This is all information I had because I already read this. I read ahead, not this time, but before. But yeah. The changes in English diet enabled by sugar plantations in the colonies also led to rising rates of a purportedly related illness, gout. With the introduction of sugar and sugar-sweetened alcoholic beverages such as sack, a sugar-sweetened wine, gout was becoming an epidemic in England, particularly among men who are more susceptible to the illness, known previously as the disease of kings and the king of diseases. By 1683, the sweeping problem of gout prompted Dr. Thomas Sydenham to write a treatise of the gout and dropsy in an effort to detail the etiology of the disease and offer practical advice to its sufferers. In Sydenham's estimation, gout overwhelmingly struck those who happened to be of a robust habit, who lead an indolent life and are used to live very full. The robust habit referred to a rich diet paired frequently with wine and beer. This behavior, he claimed, was particularly common among the male sex. Women rarely exhibited such a voracious appetite and immoderate drinking behavior. And believed that overindulgence was the cause. Sydenham added that gout typically beset gross and corpulent, although it occasionally befell lean and slender folk as well. Sydenham was himself a gout sufferer. He believed himself to be speaking both as a medical authority and as a fellow fat, gout-afflicted man. Interestingly, while Sydenham and Werner pointed to diet as causes of corpulence and illness, neither recognized sugar as a potential cause. Sydenham, in the denial typical of a sugar addict, actively suggested that a concoction using brown sugar and the syrup of marshmallows be used as a cure. You got diabetes? Add more sugar to it. It'll be fine. And these are the people who begin to shape what we currently believe about health and health standards. I mean, that's really the takeaway point of this book for me, is that we cannot trust the basis of our health standards. Really shouldn't trust the basis of most of our beauty standards. At least the beauty standards that we can directly draw to Europe, to the Renaissance and those European beauty standards, because those are propaganda. They are propaganda developed to make people feel good about the slave trade. It's really hard to say it more plainly than that. But, you know, most of the medical standards of today, most of the health and medical standards of today, especially around body size, are based in propaganda that was developed, white supremacist propaganda that was developed to prop up the transatlantic slave trade. Yeah, that's... So, yeah, that's a lot of what this book is about. Sugar was rarely, if ever, recognized by 17th century English physicians as the culprit driving both gout and what was described as gross corpulence. But this was largely because many doctors didn't quite understand how, along with the quality of food consumed affected a person's weight. This situation was to change in the coming century. Still, in Holland, the other country where sugar consumption, corpulence, and gout were on the rise, at least one 17th century physician was making the connection among the three. In the same year that Sydenham published his treatise, the Dutch doctor Stephen Blankaart wrote that the ubiquity of sugar in Amsterdam was associated with the marked increase of cavities, corpulence, and gout. Fatness was becoming more common, but remained a condition common among relatively well-off. Regardless, Western doctors were making nascent arguments about the link between fatness and ill health. Still, concerns about physical health of the fat man as he partook of white gold and port wine was not the foremost concern of the high-minded Englishman. For the English intellectual, fat bodies had a different, pernicious association. In Shakespeare's Love's Labour's Lost, the King of Navarre and three of his oldest friends swear an oath of austerity. As part of the oath, they promise to remain celibate, fast one day each week, and eat only one meal per day the remaining days of the week. The pact was to last for 3 years. The character Longaville explains, "I am resolved, 'tis but a 3 years' fast. The mind shall banquet though the body pine. Fat punches have lean pates, and dainty bits. Make rich the ribs, and bankrupt quite the wits. Longville here describes a mind and body in conflict. When a man plies his body with food and drink, developing fat paunches and rich ribs, he is also bankrupting his wits. But when a man fasts, starves his body, makes it pine, now he is offering his mind a banquet, one that makes possible higher intellectual pursuits. This quote, particularly the couplet that begins, "Fat paunches have lean pates," was widely circulated in the 17th century England. Many believed it was originally penned by Shakespeare, but there is also evidence that he cribbed the idea from St. Jerome, the 4th century Roman priest. Jerome himself was thought to have translated the Greek expression, "a fat belly does not produce fine senses." Even if Shakespeare is not the ultimate source of the expression, it is consequential that several of his works propagated the view that slim men had sharp wits, whereas fat men were insipid. This was to be found, for example, in the tragedy of Julius Caesar, when Caesar states, "Let me have men about me that are fat, sleek-headed men, and such as sleep o' nights. Yon Cassius has a lean and hungry look. He thinks too much. Such men are dangerous." The view of fat men as too self-indulgent to be particularly intelligent was embodied in the character of Sir John Falstaff. Falstaff, who appears in several of Shakespeare's plays, was creative and resourceful in some respects, but too much of a gluttonous, drunken braggart and a thief to be taken as thoughtful nobleman. He cops to this in Henry IV when he cries, "If I do grow great, I'll grow less, for I'll purge and leave sack, and live cleanly as a nobleman should do." Coming from one of the most important artist intellectuals of English Golden Age, these and other works by Shakespeare make a broad cultural statement. They suggest that greater concerns about the potential relationship between fat and health during this era was the dread of fatness as indicative of weak character and dullness of mind. Indeed, it was not only artists and poets who made such connections. Many important scientists and natural philosophers shaped the perception that full stomachs were correlated to empty heads. The writings of René Descartes are a case in point. Though he was not an Englishman, Descartes' ideas were incredibly influential among English intellectuals. He too claimed that base sensual desires, especially from food and drink, could stand in the way of higher pursuits. Condemning the animal appetites, Descartes offered counsel to those who might otherwise be prone to overindulgence in food and drink. In a series of letters on the topic to his friend Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia, the granddaughter of King James I, he advised Elizabeth to regulate her food intake so as to ensure the best exercise of her mental faculties, urging a good diet, taking only food and drink that refreshes the blood and purges without any effort. Elizabeth countered, "René Descartes, you drunken fart, you drink, therefore you am." Now, Descartes walks into a bar. The bartender says, "Hey, René, would you like a beer?" Descartes says, "I think not." Poof! Elizabeth countered, As for the remedies against excessive passions, I agree that they are hard to practice, and indeed that they aren't sufficient to prevent bodily disorders, but they may suffice to prevent the soul from being troubled and losing its capacity for free judgment. I can't tell if she was tossing shade back at him. These correspondences underscore the belief that eating too much stymied rational thought, freeing oneself from the whims of sensual desire created space for intelligent thought and action. Elizabeth was not the only English person privy to Descartes' discourses on the appetites. His ideas about the relationship between appetites and intellect spread like wildfire in England. Those who did not identify as Cartesians respected his import, even reproducing similar notions, particularly when it came to questions of overfeeding. Walter Charlton, a natural philosopher and court physician to Elizabeth's uncle Charles I, was one such intellectual. Charlton published his own treatise on the perils of overindulgence. The finest wits, Charlton wrote, were not the custody of gross and robust bodies, but for the most part are lodged in delicate and tender constitutions. As a physician, Charlton was likely aware of the growing medical concern regarding portliness among Englishmen. But in keeping with many intellectuals at the time, Charlton's own concern seemed to have been less about the effects of excess fat on the body and about what corpulence indicated about the mind. When he wrote about the ill effects of fatness, he was concerned with what obesity revealed about the character and mental capacity of the man who might so openly flaunt his rotund body. As in, have the audacity to be fat in public? Other intellectuals were more directly influenced by Descartes, and in terms of the presumed relationship between fat and intellect, they resolved to practice what they preached. Robert Boyle, for example, a contemporary of Charlton and a follower of Descartes' life and work, was nearly as well known for his abstemious diet and delicate physique as for his theories. His body was believed to be a demonstration of his mental fortitude. He was praised for his depth of knowledge and his refusal to allow vagaries of appetite to derail him. He neither ate nor drank to gratify the varieties of appetite, but merely to support nature. For these reasons, he was deemed thin and fine, with the latter term here serving as a synonym for refined, like a typical hard student. Whew, I'm down to the good part of the joint now. Chimney Christmas. English philosophers, several of whom were influenced by Descartes, treated fatness as evidence of vapidity. Such was the case with the philosopher Henry Moore. Moore's lean physique lent credibility to his intellectual pursuits. Early in his career, Moore maintained an avid love affair with Cartesianism, which came to an abrupt halt as he matured. But he never escaped the swirling cultural influence articulated perhaps most notably by Descartes on the relationship between sensuality and intellect. Moore was known to have reduced himself to almost skin and bones. He was praised by his own biographer for his temperance and his ethereal sort of body, which served as evidence of his mastery over the animal nature within. That right there, that sentence, mastery over the animal nature within, is part of what will be used to lessen black people. This is where, unexpectedly, the artist and diplomat Peter Paul Rubens comes back into frame. Rubens never knew Charlton, who took the post as court physician 1 year after the artist's death, but he had frequent dealings with the English. In the early 1620s, Rubens could count King Charles I among his high-class art patrons and protégés. An amateur painter and art collector, Charles I had pestered Rubens for a self-portrait, which the artist reluctantly provided. Rubens died before Cartesianism took off, but it is worth noting that Descartes was only an important proponent, not the progenitor of the relationship between abstention and intellect. I apologize, Sabrina Strings, for using a different word, but you used a word that I just don't know how to pronounce. Renaissance artists and intellectuals in England and the Low Countries often harbored a romance for Napoleonic austerity. Rubens was surprisingly perhaps counted in this number, for though he is remembered for painting round and fleshy women with skin white as snow, he himself observed a strict diet. Writing to his nephew, Rubens lamented the fatness of so-called modern men. The chief cause of the difference between the ancients and the men of our age is our laziness. We are always eating, drinking, and have no care to exercise our bodies. Therefore, our lower bellies, ever filled by a ceaseless voracity, bulge out overloaded. Our legs are never less, and our arms show the signs. The strapping Peter Paul would have none of this flabbiness, for himself. He was known to rise at 4 a.m. and eat little throughout the day so that his stomach and its digestion would not get in the way of his intellectual and artistic endeavors. The affections of these artists, philosophers, and scientists may not have represented those of the average 17th century man, but they slowly came to represent those of the typical intellectual. By the mid-18th century, the archetype of the thin and refined male student and thinker was widespread, particularly in England. Still, sentiments about male slimness were divided. While some people continued to believe that a lean physique was a laudable display of a man's ambition and dedication to higher pursuits, others claimed that it represented a morbid seriousness and a complete abandonment of healthy living. Thus, during the 17th century, when fatness began its slow decline into disrepute, it was concerns over aesthetics, and not aesthetics, that drove the distaste for fat male bodies. This is actually a good conclusion paragraph for what we just read. A lot of what we just read was covering the same ground over and over again. I felt like, and, importantly so, just, and good for the book, just not entirely new enough information to warrant highlighting. I think that is where we're going to leave it today, because I have stuff to do this afternoon. So yeah. Well, cheese and crackers. I'm still not used to being back in the streaming and all that. I'm still kind of off in the middle of everywhere in my mind. So yeah, we will come back to this next Tuesday, and we should be live again on Thursday with Brock and having some fun, a much less serious situation. Thank you everybody for being here. Thank you JB1200. Thank you Just Me Crystal. Thank you Maddie Holmes. And I think that's everybody. Thank you all you lurkers. Much love. I appreciate everybody being here. Stick around for the raid, and now is the time on the show when I say, as they say around here, 2 up, 2 down, VA, double deuces. I'm out, y'all.